Started. If everyone could take their seats for this session. All right, my name is Stephen Griggs. I'm the chair of the board of ECA and one of the founders, along with a number of others. Welcome to this session called Public-Private Partnerships to Create Our Corridor. As we all know, there are many different public and private organizations that have an interest in our corridor area in southern Georgian Bay. Of course, no one person or group can make landscape scale conservation happen. What we need is a collective will to move forward, one step at a time, with each group bringing its expertise, skills, and resources to bear. We need governments, NGOs, and private landowners to work together to make the corridor a reality and a success. Today, we're joined by leaders from several key organizations who are important players in making our corridor a reality for a conversation about their thoughts on how we can do this. We hope to have a free-flowing conversation, and we will have a Q&A at the end. I think if you go to the next slide, is our expert there? Okay, having some technical challenges. So we have Shawn Carey, director of the NEC, Nadia Dubyk, who's a Grey Highlands councilor, vice chair of the Grey Sawbill Conservation Authority, and a director of the Bruce Trail Conservancy, so wearing 3 different hats. Ed McDonnell, CEO of the Greenbelt Foundation, and Tony Morris, Conservation Policy and Campaign Director of Ontario Nature. What we're going to start with is give each of them a few minutes to tell us a bit about their organizations, and we'll start with Ed.
Good afternoon. This was amazing to walk in here and not only to see so amazing number of people, but really a lot of incredible people I knew who are doing incredible work here. So very happy to be here. I am Ed McDonnell. I'm with the Greenbelt Foundation. We work for the past 20 years to protect, enhance, and engage people in Ontario's Greenbelt, which is over 2 million acres. And I'm going to show you a little slide just to give you a sense of the geography. And before we get into the Q&As, also just maybe say a few things about, the work that's being done here in a very important part of Ontario and an important part of the Niagara Escarpment, which is part of the Greenbelt, can be contextualized in a regional sense and in a couple other ways. So that's what I was hoping to do, and we'll see if the slides cooperate. One of the things I just wanted to mention was one of the approaches that the Greenbelt Foundation takes consistently is working in partnership. And what I've highlighted on this slide is a group of organizations that worked with us recently to develop a near-urban nature vision and strategy for Southern Ontario. And these groups were really coming together to say, we know, particularly in this near-urban environment, that there are unique natural spaces, but also unique challenges, unique needs. And what the work that was done, it was sponsored in part by the federal government, was to paint a picture of what we are actually talking about and what we need to advance the kind of projects that will protect and enhance connectivities, cores, and corridors in Southern Ontario. So I'll say a little more about that in a second. We'll see if this... I won't go into that. Maybe just a peek at where we are. So on the slide there, you can see the Greenbelt geography, which is circling the most urbanized parts of Canada. In this larger region of the Greater Golden Horseshoe, it's really quite a remarkable space in that there's 1 in 4 Canadians that live in this area, and about 25% of our economy is based here. And so the Greenbelt is really this area around these urban centers, which is in protecting critical water resource systems, natural heritage, and some of the best agricultural systems and lands, not just in Canada, but in the world. And so, again, I want to sort of put your minds into this larger context piece. The other thing that's important here is you can see a little bit of it. We are here centered in the Great Lakes region. Globally speaking, the Great Lakes region is incredibly unique for a whole variety of reasons, the amount of fresh water, As we move forward, it's increasingly important as a buffer to the impacts of climate change. So the work you're doing and hearing about today can really be understood in that context geographically, but also with population growth, with the rising increase of the impacts of climate and many other factors. The work that's being done on the ground is really helping to support things that both advance the local needs, but also are contextualized by some pretty big trends. So I'm going to end there a little bit. I just really wanted to say, I'm going to maybe show you one last slide because Stephen's getting antsy, I can tell. Stephen, can you advance just, and then I'll stop talking and I'll pass it over to Tony. But very briefly, the last thing to say is, like, what's maybe amazing to people is in Southern Ontario, we have still, despite the amount of urbanization that's gone on, incredible biodiversity. Like, one of the most biodiverse areas in the entire country. But we also have a biodiversity crisis. And so when we get back into talking about some of these other issues, it can be understood in that way. And it can also be understood in a larger set of cores and corridors where you're sitting in between the Carolinians, the Kawarthas, north-south corridors, and other things. So again, that's a bit of context. And Stephen, I apologize for going on so long.
Yeah, so as Stephen said, my name is Tony Morris, and I am the Conservation Policy and Campaigns Director at Ontario Nature. For those not familiar, Ontario Nature is a conservation charitable organization that has been protecting wild species and wild spaces since 1931. We represent over 130,000 members and supporters and 150 member groups that make up our Nature Network. Our Nature Network is really a grassroots group organization of groups from across the province, including the Escarpment Corridor Alliance. We also act as a land trust with 26 nature reserves totaling over 3,000 hectares and publish an award-winning magazine. Yeah, no, this is not working. So yeah, I mean, there's really, I won't go into too much detail on this. Obviously, there's a significant need for more protected areas in Ontario. As Ed mentioned, we are in the midst of a biodiversity crisis, and there are 270 species listed in Ontario, regardless of the recent proposal to cut that list in half. And the situation in Ontario is that we're sitting still just under 11% of our total land and water area protected, which kind of makes Ontario a laggard nationally. The government of Ontario is still yet to commit to protecting 30% of lands and waters by 2030, which has been done nationally, which is based on international agreements of what is needed as the minimum to halt and reverse biodiversity decline. So we have quite a ways to go. And, you know, I won't go into too many. Obviously, I think this room, people understand the benefits of more protected areas, not only for biodiversity and ecosystem services, but some mental health and well-being benefits, but also as a way to act in reconciliation with Indigenous groups in terms of bringing back some land stewardship and cultural connections to the landscape. And just a brief about ecological corridors, since that's kind of what we're going into. You know, it's really about maintaining connectivity so that species can move across the landscape. It's not necessarily about protecting everything, but it's about managing the landscape in a way that species can still move from habitat to habitat safely and continue to thrive. And Ontario Nature is working on an ecological corridor project in the Sault Ste. Marie region with Garden River First Nation, Algoma Highlands Conservancy, and the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Because like the Escarpment Corridor Alliance, the best way to advance conservation is in collaboration with groups on the ground and local organizations and First Nations. As well, Ontario Nature coordinates the groups that are on this slide. So these are organizations across Ontario that are also working on ecological corridors in different parts of the province. Again, this isn't something the federal government or the provincial government does, but Ontario Nature has taken it upon itself to bring those groups together to kind of share resources, tips, tricks, and learn from each other so that we can all advance this sort of work at a provincial level. So I'll conclude there.
Thank you. I just want to thank the Escarpment Corridor Alliance for inviting the Niagara Escarpment Commission to speak at your event today. So much appreciate that and the invite. My name's Shawn Carey. I'm the director with the Niagara Escarpment Commission. I did send a slide. I don't know if we, oh, there it is. Okay. It's kind of hard to see, but yeah, it's magic. So yeah, the Niagara Escarpment Commission, we're an agency of the province of Ontario. So we're really associated with the Ministry of Natural Resources, and the Niagara Escarpment Commission was created in 1975 to deal with development that was occurring across the escarpment in kind of an unprotected or unmanaged fashion, if I could say that. And there was a couple of key things that happened, particularly in the Milton area, with quarry activity that was happening that really stimulated the creation of the Niagara Escarpment Planning and Development Act. And there's certainly some pioneers in this room today, or that have been in this room today, that were really pivotal to getting, convincing the province that we had to have a landscape level plan created for the Niagara Escarpment. So that happened in the mid-1970s, as I said, and it really puts forward the objectives and purposes of why the Niagara Escarpment Commission was created. So there's a number of staff that we have that support 17 commissioners who are, representative of the municipalities that we have within the Niagara Escarpment Plan area, and also publicly appointed bodies that or individuals that represent various stakeholder interests across the Niagara Escarpment. So when we look at the geography that we manage, it's from the tip of Tobermory to Niagara Falls. So part of what our mandate is to regulate development in a way that's compatible with the escarpment environment. And so we do that through a bunch of regulations and things that I won't get into. But one of the other items that I think is really relevant to the conversation today and what we've been talking about this morning is one of the things that we really try to foster is a system of open parks and open spaces called the NEPA system. And we work really closely with our municipalities and conservation authorities. Bruce Trail Conservancy is a huge partner. And what we do is try to foster access to the escarpment through recreation, sustainable management plans with those public agencies. And so that NEPOS is certainly something that will maybe come up later in the conversation to talk about how we utilize that system to get better access to the escarpment, but also try to connect the Bruce Trail. So the Bruce Trail network is really the thought behind it is that it connects those parks and open spaces across the entirety of the Niagara Escarpment. So there's more work to do on that. Certainly the Niagara Escarpment is not, the Commission is not the doers of that. We try to facilitate that with our partners. And so this map up here, which I apologize is kind of hard to see, but those dark green areas that you can see dotted along the Niagara Escarpment are those parks and protected areas, or open spaces, I should say. And so that's connected by the Bruce Trail, largely connected by the Bruce Trail. So I see Michael in the audience, and we work really closely with the Bruce Trail. I want to thank them for all their efforts. So maybe I'll just leave it there, Steve, and I have some more detail after.
Great, thank you so much. So my name is Nadia Dubyk. I'm a councillor with the municipality of Grey Highlands. One of the very cool things that municipal elected officials get to do is sit on the boards of conservation authorities. And so that is my connection to the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority. I am a board member and the vice chair. And on a personal level, I have a love of nature, and so I've been volunteering with the Bruce Trail Conservancy. I've been volunteering with my local club, the Beaver Valley Club, for many years. These are great opportunities to kind of get together with like-minded people. And in the past 3 years, I've had the pleasure to also sit on the Bruce Trail Conservancy Board. And so that is what I do as a volunteer on, in my personal life. And so that's the reason why I'm wearing sort of these two hats. And I feel like I'm kind of doing double duty here compared to everybody else, but that is okay. Okay, so if we can, do we have a slide here for, yes. Okay, so this is, so those that may not be very familiar with conservation authorities, this is unique to Ontario. And there are 36 conservation authorities in Ontario, and they are community-based watershed agencies. And that means that these are not man-made boundaries, but natural boundaries made by watersheds. And so that's a very, I would say, sort of a unique approach. It was created back in 1946 with the Conservation Authority Act. And the mandate, a fundamental mandate is to protect people and property from flooding and other natural hazards, and to conserve natural resources for economic, social, and environmental benefits. Within, when I think about the Grey-Sauble Conservation Authority, it is a small team of about 28 staff, but they do a full slew of programs and activities, and that includes reviewing planning and permit applications for where development is, is able, manage flood control and prevention infrastructure. They protect lives and prevent flooding, damage. They plant trees. They restore forests. And I think what a really interesting point about the Conservation Authority as a collective is that they are the second largest landowner in Ontario, so second to Crown land. So that is protecting green space right there. And if we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So this is a snapshot here. We have a map here of the Grey-Sauble Conservation Authority. So it is highlighted here. It's shaded in green. So that is the Grey-Sauble watershed. And the little, if you take a look at those yellow specks and spots throughout the green shading, those are the Grey-Sauble lands that are conserved. So Grey-Sauble Conservation Authority manages 208 properties with 29,000 acres. And I find that the bottom few points are actually quite interesting. 84 properties totaling over 13,600 acres are within the Niagara Escarpment. 7% of the Bruce Trail is on Grey-Sauble Conservation Authority property. And as we know, the Bruce Trail is within the Greenbelt. So, as I'm looking across here, it's this interconnectedness between our organizations, which really makes for strong, I think, nature preservation in corridors. 35% of the Niagara Escarpment plan development area is within the Grey-Sauble Conservation Authority watershed. And so, nature works in interconnected systems, and so do we. And I think that is our strength. And then if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. And so let's just switch hats here and talk about the Bruce Trail Conservancy. So the Bruce Trail Conservancy is Canada's oldest and longest marked footpath. So it's enabling movement of people and species throughout this whole corridor. And Bruce Trail was really an idea that was envisioned back in the 1960s, having a trail from Niagara to Tobermory. And then when we fast forward to today, we have 72% of the trail is permanently secured. That's almost 1,400 kilometers of trails for hikers and over 21,000 acres of Niagara Escarpment land protected. So it preserves sensitive ecosystems. It supports biodiversity and species at risk. It gives species at risk a place to thrive. So I'll just leave it at that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's start with a really basic question. Do you think that our concept at ECA of a landscape scale corridor makes sense? We know it's a big idea. Obviously, we're not the only ones in the world, although when we came up with the idea, we thought we were the only ones in the world doing this. But we've learned to the contrary. So Ed, why don't you start off? Just general thoughts about a corridor.
So the short answer is yes. See, that was very dramatic. So the short answer is yes, but more specifically, again, coming back to the Greenbelt, which is 7,000 square kilometers and spans from Niagara to Northumberland and from Lake Ontario to the south shores of Lake Simcoe and all up and down the Niagara Escarpment. That's an immense area. It does have, as I said earlier, an integrated natural heritage system, water resource system, et cetera. But what we learned, particularly in our work on the near urban nature in southern Ontario, is we can come down to a certain level of detail with that work, so we can understand it. Sometimes referred to as like the 30,000 foot level. But what we absolutely also need is, within the frame that we can develop at that level, and the strategies we can develop at that level, is local work. And we'll talk more about sort of some of the specifics, or you've heard earlier today about some of the specifics of the work that the Escarpment Corridor Alliance is doing, but it's extremely well aligned with that idea of, within a larger frame, how do we conceptualize, do evidence-based work, and think about strengthening and advancing ecological water resources and other goals within the concept of a corridor or in other ways. But I think it makes an immense amount of sense, and it's also absolutely critical.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, particularly things that, when you start to look things at the ecosystem and watershed level, you're making planning decisions based on the natural world rather than these arbitrary political boundaries that, human development patterns tend to set up. And basically, we have this kind of problem right now in the way that human development and political systems operate, where we are fragmenting and we're making decisions in isolation from each other, which is kind of why we're in a climate and biodiversity crisis. So sort of larger scale ecosystem planning, where you're looking at connectivity for terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, you start to look at things in a more holistic way. And then you can balance competing priorities and land uses and make decisions that actually respect the natural world and the way it operates.
Yeah, ditto to that. I think the short answer being yes, they can play a pivotal role. And I think, specific question, is it something we can rally behind? And I'd say yes. I think the key with corridors is what is it it's helpful to use as a management tool and something to develop objectives and goals towards. I think the key is, what is the purpose of that corridor, and defining what success looks like and how you measure success. Because without that kind of vision that has goals and objectives associated with it, it's really hard to get people to rally behind it, because they don't maybe not share that shared vision. So I know listening to the Y2Y presentation this morning was really helpful, because it was very specific about what they were doing in its grand scale. I would say the Niagara Escarpment plan area, the regulated areas, or just the Niagara Escarpment in general, is a corridor. It's 725 kilometer long corridor, and I think when we talk about political boundaries, we have this provincial landscape level plan with a number of municipalities and conservation authorities, all with differing pressures. So that causes a challenge from us from a local standpoint, but given that we have this piece of legislation that is specific to that large geography, it really helps drive home the need for that corridor. And where we need to do a better job as the Niagara Escarpment Commission is really telling that story of why it's so important. And one of the things that we're working on, and I keep talking about this, and staff will get upset with me about keep pushing this thing, but it's a State of the Escarpment report, so we can actually speak to, are we being successful in managing that corridor? And I would suggest that we do have a number of goals and objectives that we can measure success against. So that would be my advice when you're looking at corridors and developing corridors, is really having a distinct vision as to what that is and an objective that you're trying to manage towards, so that people can rally behind that. So yeah, but I think we have work to do at the Commission to do that. So this has been helpful conversations this morning, particularly listening on the Y2Y presentation about how we can try to tell our story about where we're doing well and where we need to improve.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so this is number 4. Short answer is yes. And we can do big things, right? When we do take a look at our organizations that are up here, the conservation authorities, the Bruce Trail Conservancy, those are big ideas, and those are working. And so this is totally possible. I think, what we do have to consider is also timelines and, how long some of these corridors may take to develop and to secure. Just, just build on what Shawn was saying, one of those things that we do need to define when we do talk corridors is how do we define, what are we defining? What is corridor? What is that green space? When we think about agricultural land, are we talking about, a certain amount of development or not? All of these things need to be, I think, fleshed out more fully so that we can then understand what success is and where are we headed. It's also a little bit about sort of the how do big things happen. I think to my experience being on the BTC board, a lot of this is really done through community. It's done through relationships, and it starts with the individual. Thinking about the Bruce Trail community and the trail that goes from Niagara to Tobermory, there are 9 clubs that span that whole corridor, and we have a very strong volunteer base to make that happen. And they clear the trails, they manage the lands, they steward the lands, and we also have a very generous donor base and a supporter base to make land securement a reality, and working with the allies, and other agencies. So it is a very cooperative, I think, goal, for us to be able to reach, but it takes everybody. It starts at the individual, and then we do need to work cooperatively, really to make this a reality.
Sorry, we don't have a large tech group working here today, so we have to do it ourselves. So what I'm hearing is that you all agree that this idea of a corridor in southern Georgia Bay makes sense. I think much of our area fits within, for example, the Greenbelt and the Niagara Escarpment is a part of the Greenbelt. But we also have to recognize that both of those areas are the result of political negotiations, and some of it's quite historical. And I think I recall that the original land that was intended to go into the Niagara Escarpment was like 5 times what it is today. So there's a lot, funny little pockets, and political negotiations went on and so on, but thank God it was done, that's for sure. And Nadia, you do raise an interesting point, which is what is the corridor, how big is it? And that's a debate that we're having internally at the ECA. So is it water-based like the conservation authorities, in which case it's almost all of Ontario, it seems, when we look at the maps, or is it more based on what you can see, so like out here, the escarpment itself and the rock and all that sort of stuff. So we're still, as an organization about 3 years old, we're still kind of working our way through it, and we do need to come up with key metrics of success, and we're definitely working on that, so thank you. So why don't we then turn to some of the key objectives of your organizations and how you see those objectives can help this corridor come alive within the jurisdiction that you have. And I guess we've got 2 totally politically controlled guys, not controlled, but you work for the government effectively, and we have a politician over here as well. But so we recognize you may not be able to say everything that you want to say, but please, if you can just talk a little bit about some of your key objectives and how they can fit in with supporting this idea of a corridor in southern Georgian Bay.
Well, to begin, as one of the politically controlled people, I'm not sure the government would believe that, but we are an independent charity, although we do have 4 provincial directors on our board of directors. But we do try to work very collaboratively with the province, and the Greenbelt, Niagara Escarpment, and Oakers and Rain are, in their most simplest form, provincial plans. But in the reality, they are big ideas They have been animated by community. They have had an immense amount of care investment, and that's what makes them magical and what makes them realize the potential. So the work of the foundation is really to get the most out of the Greenbelt for Ontario, to recognize that when the Niagara Escarpment was protected by the Bill Davis government, Oak Ridges Moraine protected by the Harris government, and then the Greenbelt created by Dalton McGuinty's government. All of these decisions were really gearing toward looking at the long-term interests of the province and to think very seriously about our water resources, our natural resources. And if Keith Curry is still here, I would have to say, you know, the incredible agricultural lands that we have here, not to mention green spaces and recreational opportunities, and many, many things that make Ontario and Southern Ontario an incredibly great place to live. The water, food, other things drive an immense amount of our economy, and many, many other things. So our job is really to try to shine a light on the opportunities, sometimes shine a light on the challenges, and to think about how we move forward together. Again, we're facing huge challenges right now. We have immense population growth. We have impact of climate. We have people who are threatening our economy. We need to be smart, and we want to really work together and think about how we marshal the resources and really get the most out of these incredible landscapes and all the people who animate them and make them so valuable and create so much value for Ontario. So I'm not sure if a bit of my stump speech, but
I guess I'm the guy in the up here that isn't politically controlled in any way. So, but I'm not going to say anything super provocative. You know, as I mentioned, Ontario Nature, since 1931, our mission has been to protect wild species and wild spaces. That is our modus operandi. One of the programs is our Protected Places program, which is really about advancing conservation in any way to reach those international and national targets to halt and reverse biodiversity decline. That program consists of a few different projects, one of which is working with municipalities and conservation authorities and other landowners to assess their lands to see if they meet the national standard of what is considered a protected area. So we do that with municipalities and other partners across the province. Another aspect of that program is looking at the managed forests, which is the areas of Ontario that are licensed by the government to do industrial logging. So it's primarily in central and northern Ontario. And you know, forestry companies that choose to get certified by Forest Stewardship Council, they have to set aside a certain percentage of those lands for conservation purposes. What's missing is moving those lands to permanent protection. So we work with forestry companies, Indigenous communities to advance that, as well as working with partners across the province on ecological corridors. So, you know, again, our mission and our objectives is very much about protecting those spaces so that species have somewhere to thrive.
Some days I feel like I'm controlled politically by 26 different entities. So that sometimes makes it challenging. But as an agency of the Crown, we often have a lot of flexibility, which is a huge benefit. I just wanted to paraphrase a bit like what our purpose statement is as a Niagara Escarpment Commission, and it's to on the maintenance of the Niagara Escarpment and as a continuous and natural environment, and to ensure that development occurs, that only development that occurs is compatible with the natural environment. So that sounds kind of easy to do, but it's difficult to do that, I would suggest, with local communities in mind across the entirety of the escarpment. So where we really struggle is trying to maintain that connectivity is a huge part, whether you call it a corridor connectivity, of upholding the Niagara Escarpment environment from tip to tail. And right now it seems part of the way we're doing that is through the issuance of 400 to 500 development permits a year. And that is not, in my opinion, a success story as to how we're able to roll that up and show that we have measurable success in maintaining that corridor. One of the things that, and you triggered this for me in your opening remarks, is that I've learned since joining the Niagara Escarpment Commission is what a great job the staff have done over the years and decades of managing the visual resource. It's something I took for granted when I drive along or I'm in the escarpment environment is that when you look out across it, you generally don't see anything that impacts that. There's the odd one, but that scenic resource, which is something that I often forget about, that's really critical to maintaining part of that corridor. So maintaining that connectivity is hugely important to us. We only have so much capability to do it, so it's partners that are up on this stage and yourself as ECA that I think are helpful from a science-based standpoint too, to roll that information up. So that's another challenge, is how do you gather all that information in a scientific way that you can show trends across the escarpment as a whole. I know one of the other factors that we're quite involved in, as I said at the outset, is around maintaining and promoting access for recreation to the escarpment. That sometimes proves a bit challenging, and I know that's another thing that our element that I should say that our partner agencies that we deal with around the parks and open space system, that they really that we're challenged with during COVID. And so recreation is great. That's why I live 5 minutes down the road, is why I came here. But at the same time, we've noticed that if you build it, you be prepared to understand what that means from a recreational standpoint and carrying capacity. There was a huge effort across these agencies during COVID to make sure to try to measure that and figure out how, as agencies, we manage, as land managers, we manage that potential issue, because it was becoming a problem. And so that's one of the things that we have a council that we are involved in of all of these agencies called the NEPOS Council. And those are some of the common issues that we share and discuss, is how to deal with some of these, like access, parking, carrying capacity. So I'm not sure how that relates to the question, but those are, I think there are a number of challenges, but I think it's important that as partners, as agencies, as stakeholders, that we talk about the challenges and not just the great things that we're trying to achieve, because the challenges are the things that we need to work together and collaborate on.
Okay, so let's start with Grey Sauble Conservation. So when we think about, what they do and their strategic objectives, they do have quite a few objectives that do align very closely with the ideas of, healthy corridors. They enhance their land management. So that's monitoring and managing the ecology and the biodiversity of the Grey Sauble properties. So that includes forest management and public access to footpaths, so that we all have access to nature. They look to improve watershed health. So that's ensuring the ongoing understanding of watershed conditions. Programs, under that include, drinking water source protection, watershed health reporting, surface water quality monitoring. So these are all very important aspects of having healthy natural spaces. They also work very closely with the agricultural sector. They do have stewardship grants, to promote cover crops, livestock fencing, and tree planting. So again, these are, in efforts to help ensure that our water courses do remain healthy. And, I think an important piece of work that they do is also strengthening environmental education and communication. So this is getting children excited about nature. They have day camps in the summer. They do turtle stewardship programs. They create educational kits that they put out throughout the library systems. And so this is, I think, educating people and educating, kids and the young folk is really important, because, if they understand nature, then they'll learn to love nature and protect nature. When we talk about some challenges, Grey Sauble is created by the Ontario government through an act. And what I will maybe just highlight here is Bill 23 with the Homes Built Faster, More Homes Built Faster. So that removed the responsibility of conservation authorities to review natural heritage. And natural heritage being the significant wetlands, the woodlands, the valley lands, wildlife habitats. And so then that So it didn't go away, but it shifted from the conservation authorities to municipal responsibility. And in Grey Highlands, that responsibility was taken up by Grey County. So these are, being, for Grey Sauble, being an arm of the Ontario government, they have the ability to change mandates of these agencies. And so, but of course, it's all about working collaboratively, I would say as an ecosystem, so that we can pick up the work elsewhere, so that we can do the right things. On the BTC side, BTC is a green corridor, and so it's, it has very clear strategic strategies, as we've been discussing here. One is urgently protecting land and securing land. So this is all about the connected corridors. So it is within the Niagara Escarpment UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve. And it's, as we all know it, that is one of the most biodiverse and geologically significant regions in North America. So this is worth protecting. The Bruce Trail also restores and cares for escarpment lands. They take responsible stewardship for long-term ecological health. BTC has expert ecologists. They conduct inventories to understand the land, observe species, and determine what will foster vibrant and healthy ecosystems. And these projects include seed orchards, controlled burns, planting native species, and managing invasive species. And of course, it's, the Bruce Trail always looks to enhance the experience for the users and for hikers. We have an incredible trail network, an incredible amount of volunteers. The trail passes through 23 municipalities and 7 conservation authorities. And the aligned organizations, we have aligned organizations with Ontario Ministries and the Indigenous communities. So we really are here to work collaboratively. Thank you.
Shawn, you raised a very interesting point about one of the challenges to building a corridor in this area, which is that the NEC is basically it's set up to be a reactive organization. So your job is to say yes or no to a development permit application, as opposed to being more proactive. Although you do have the sort of the broader parks concept, which is built into the plan, but I don't think we've seen a lot coming out of that in the recent past, and I'd really encourage you to keep working on that, because I think that's very, very important, is connecting all of these areas that are publicly owned, generally speaking. And it's certainly wonderful to see the province expanding significantly the protected areas within our corridor and more broadly within the province. And we don't always say thank you to this particular provincial government, or probably any, but that's a wonderful thing to see done. And in terms of, we haven't really talked much about what private individuals can do, or small organizations like ours. But in the terms of, for example, the new protected areas, I think of the Beaver Valley Lowlands, for example, which is a spectacularly beautiful area if you've not been there. That much of that will now have an elevated level of protection, but it's only the lands that really it's the Conservation Authority owns that are being protected. So there's a lot of privately owned land still within the valley that one of our objectives in the next year or two is to try to get conservation easements on much of that land. So I think it shows you how governments and private individuals and private organizations like our land trust can try to work together. I think we've got maybe about 5 or so more minutes of us chatting away here, and then we can move to questions and answers. But why don't we move to science? We like to think at ECA that we're a science-first organization. We've commissioned some groundbreaking work around geospatial mapping that really ignores the municipal boundaries and other artificial boundaries. Fortunately, the Greenbelt Foundation gave us a very significant grant which made that possible. So thank you very much to the Greenbelt Foundation for helping us with that. why don't we maybe just talk a bit about, from your expert perspective, what more do we need to do as an organization, and what perhaps your organization can bring to the table in terms of scientific work, so that we truly are protecting what should be protected, not just what we think should be protected.
Well, I'll be fairly brief just because of the interest time, but like just start with the Niagara Escarpment. So in the last couple of years, Niagara Escarpment's always been this incredibly important part of the Greenbelt, but in the last few years, particularly with concerns around connectivity, we've really honed in on some key projects related to obtaining better understanding. One of them is with the Escarpment Corridor Alliance. Another one I'll just cite is work with the supporting of the Bruce Trail Conservancy, who are looking at connectivity in the context of climate change and what that'll mean for species and what we need to actually be thinking about in terms of maintaining species habitat and the larger goal of connectivity. So those are the kinds of things we are really focusing on from a science and knowledge development perspective. And we hope that learnings in these areas can then be utilized in other parts of the province and certainly other parts of the Greenbelt. I'll just touch lightly on the fact we're also doing work on policy level in some really solutions-focused way about how do you create natural spaces, park-like spaces in the complicated areas in close to urban settings. And there's some very practical policy and other things you can do and need to do just because these are very complicated areas with different types of tenure and other sorts of things. So there's just an immense amount that needs to be done, and we're definitely keeping an eye on that and how we can support things that are additive to the knowledge and really extend our ability to implement things effectively.
I would suggest too that in addition to science, you should be including Indigenous knowledge system as well. So that would be a suggestion, because they're often, that traditional knowledge is complementary with the Western science. And really kind of don't reinvent the wheel. Municipalities, conservation authorities, local naturalist clubs, Indigenous communities have a wealth of knowledge about biodiversity throughout Ontario already. What's missing is kind of somebody compiling it all and synthesizing it and making it accessible to the average person. So, Ontario Nature, one of the things we do is a reptile amphibian atlas, which basically covers the whole province, and that's built by people going out with apps on their phone and saying, I saw X turtle here, I saw X snake here. And that builds that atlas, and we work with other partners doing that same thing for birds. So, I'd suggest, there's lots of people out there doing these, using iNaturalist and these other apps that basically are collecting that citizen science for you. So, don't underestimate that and make it events. That's something Ontario Nature does a lot at our nature reserves and other places, is bringing people outdoors, youth outdoors, to actually collect that data. We show them how to do it. We train them how to do it. We do long-term monitoring plots for snakes across the province. So that's something, if there's an interest in this area, Ontario Nature is available to kind of support to get those off the ground and to train local people on how to do that monitoring.
One of the benefits that we have at NEC is being closely tied to the Ministry of Natural Resources, who is a science-based ministry, and sometimes the challenge of those getting in the queue. Auditors' reports sometimes help with that queue, but we are really heavily relying on that science to help us, as I said, with the State of the Escarpment report. And again, one of the challenges I think was raised is particularly across the entirety of the escarpment, but even locally here, there's so many different organizations that are collecting different types of data, and as we suggest, like how you roll that up and get that and coordinate that is always a challenge. But one of the things that in a previous life that involved with the Ontario stewardship locally here was use of like circuitscape mapping, which is, it's kind of like heat mapping, and it shows you where the best possible, whether it's connectivity or it's stewardship activities. It's a visual way of showing where the best bang for your buck is, whether it's private land stewardship, it's property acquisition. You can see over time how you're making those connections, And visually, that's, almost all of us look to that. And that is something that people can get behind. They can see how they're, checking off that box, so to speak, on the map. And that was really helpful when we were dealing with Stewardship Ontario, because we had a lot of local groups that were wanting to do great work, but it wasn't coordinated, and it was kind of a little bit of random acts of stewardship, whereas this was visually bringing them together to focus and combine their efforts, to be honest. And that goes a long way when you're looking at funding applications, other partner agencies to collaborate. So that is a small little piece around Circuitscape, but we're looking to use that for part of our State of the Escarpment report to show from a connectivity across, whether it's private or public land. You need to start with that, I find. It helps give you a bit of strategy as to where you need to put your efforts on that corridor or connectivity.
Thank you. So both Grey Sawbull Conservation and the Bruce Trail Conservancy do have scientists on staff. Both are very focused on, they have ecologists and water specialists and focused to ensure that, as we are conserving and managing lands, that we are doing it in the best way possible. And with that, there's also the opportunity, as has already been stated, to lead with the two-eyed seeing as well, so that we can blend the Western knowledge and the Indigenous knowledge together. I think that, as we look to move forward, I think that will put us in good stead as well. We do have a lot of these, climate changes here, right? We're seeing the pressure. Grey Sawbull Conservation, what they do, one of the services they provide is for flood warning. And when a big storm is coming through, they usually have a email distribution system to warn municipalities and other agencies about, okay, a big storm's coming through, there may be flooding, within the next, so many hours or days. What we've seen this past summer are these supercell storms. So in this area, we had a 500-year storm just pop up, and the Conservation Authority was like, oh, we're having a 500-year storm now. So there was no warning, and that's not sort of how we usually manage our storms and how we warn people and warn our municipalities about storms. So things are changing, right? So these 500-year storms are happening a lot faster than 500 years, or 100-year storms are happening, a lot more frequently than 100 years. And so I think these are the realities we do need, that we are working within. And, the more we can share data, knowledge, experience, the better we will be.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that advice. It's much appreciated. And coordinating the scientific work that's already been done, layering on the use of modern technology, particularly geospatial technology, which we've been working on, I think is very important. And it does help us create those heat maps to show us where we should be focusing our efforts on what areas need to be protected and when. Why don't we open it up to some questions? There's nobody telling me we have to finish quite yet, but why don't we take a few questions? Yes, sir.
Full disclosure, I'm a scientist. I'm policy wonk, retired director of the First Nations Canada for Ontario and Great Lakes. Still kind of a management. I like your point, Shawn. I sat across from the RSIO in Canada and said, so how much fish habitat have I saved last year or the last half decade? And as a scientist, I couldn't explain it. As a policy wonk, I couldn't explain it. As a manager, I couldn't explain it. All I knew is we are losing somewhere between 6 and 10 football fields of Lake Ontario shoreline annually to infilling. I developed in the early 2000s. I spearheaded interagency regulatory streamlining agreements with the conservation authorities, with the province, and with federal government agencies. The Mulroney government came in, or the Harper government came in and changed all that in 2012. One of the reasons I sat in this workshop or this presentation on behalf of the ECA is I was hoping to hear is what were some of the things that your agencies could provide advice on, or the community advice on, is not so much the NGOs working for NGOs and reaching across and collaborating on science, all great ideas. Do a report, if you can, with the Niagara Escarpment Commission, how well are we doing? Because we saw the lady from out west who did the Y2Y and showed how much progress she was making. One of the points that I thought was important, and I think for the ECA, is I tried for many years to advance through the agencies I worked with. We need to be planning and working on a watershed basis. And the conservation authorities in Ontario, and I tried to apply this across Canada in a national policy agenda, we need to be working at a watershed basis. The ECA needs to be, and I think I've mentioned this with Jarvis and Bruce a little bit, is we need to be working on a watershed basis because the connectivity between watersheds is fundamentally for corridor management. We sit, the Shelburne Highlands is the headlands for 5 different watersheds flowing in 5 different directions. And that has to be factored into how do the corridors work. And we saw the lady from out west talk about the importance in that in her Y2Y stuff. What I'd also like to see is a question to the 4 of you for, is it Stephen? Is not only working amongst each other and collaborating on science and what have you, what are the things that you could recommend advising for or against is how the ECA can reach out to, say, the poultry producers, the pork producers, the cattle producers, the lumber producers, the land developers, because everybody in this room is digging into their pocket to try provide money to various NGOs, and I'm a member of a number of them, Watersheds Canada, Nature, you guys, all reaching into our pockets and providing that, plus tax dollars we're going in. But people are doing this because they don't feel the agencies, and no offense to you, but they don't feel the agencies are protecting their local regional interests in terms of what needs to be done. And so they say, well, if the conservation authorities aren't doing it, the county's not doing it, who's looking after, is ECA going to do this? And are we going to be running with placards for ECA doing the things that you guys can't do? So how do we build in the other private interests? And the lady from out west, she talked about hunting organizations, ranchers, landowners, transportation organizations, building and helping her build those corridors. So that's the question to you. How are you reaching across the aisle, as it were, to those other private organizations? Thank you.
So I'll just start and briefly say the Greenbelt Foundation is the real strength is that we work with a diverse range of partners. Keith Carey, who's now back in the room from the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, amazing partner to us in a whole variety of ways. I could go on and on and on, but what you described as a multifaceted, approach to partnership engagement is important. And I think the second thing I'll just say briefly is whether it's the Niagara Escarpment, the Oak Ridge Moraine, or the Greenbelt, these have always required a degree of community mobilization and people raising voices and doing some of the groundwork. And that's what's really helped us realize those things. And I don't think that's changed. And if it has changed, it's only become the case that it's even more important.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's no way that conservation organizations can do it alone, and it must be cross-sectoral to build that support, to build that case for support, and avoid any sort of potential pitfalls down the road of people potentially thinking you're taking rights away from them, or you're trying to restrict access to land. We have seen that in another part of the province where essentially, the group didn't talk to every sector, didn't talk to hunters and anglers, didn't talk to tourism, didn't talk to industry. And what happened was it led to a social media storm. Yes, that social media storm was filled with misinformation, but then of course the local politicians were concerned because it had already blown up. And it basically put a stop to any sort of advancement of conservation. That is the age we live in of misinformation and the power of social media, so there is a need to be cognizant of that and build those alliances outside those traditional partners, and really be clear about, in your communication, about what the benefit is to those other industries and those other sectors of advancing biodiversity conservation and nature conservation. Without that, you're not going to succeed, particularly in a region that is growing so much and has so much private land.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to give credit to the town of Blue Mountains. In their official plan, they have phrases in their clauses, sections on watershed planning, water source protection planning. They have just done a natural heritage inventory. But their expectation is that somebody else is peer reviewing this, that the Conservation Authorities is implementing the watershed planning. And so the challenge is that the staff there don't really have the skills, they depend on other people. So to me, it's more of an implementation. There's a lot of, overtures, respecting the environment and the ecosystems, but there isn't really a leader, a head, an organization that can assist in that. So to me, it's a little frustrating. We talk about it, but the implementation is the challenge. So I don't know if you have any suggestions on that. And
Well, we're trying to do that.
The ECA, to their credit, has done a great science-based background through the Dubyk organization, and they've got source dots for water sources all through the escarpment, and that kind of inventory of information is critical. And then it's an easier job for somebody to implement because the data's there. So thank you for what you do.
Part of the challenge is that the municipal boundaries are so man-made. So you talk about Town of Blue Mountains having a watershed study. Well, most of the water for Town of Blue Mountains actually comes from Grey Highlands, and Grey Highlands has even fewer people and fewer experts on staff as a population, 10,000 people, something like that, in a tiny little tax base. So we need groups like ECA to help, and through funding from Greenbelt, for example, we've been able to do some really sophisticated scientific work, and then provide that directly to the municipal staff and feed it into the provincial systems, and Greenbelt and EC have databases and so on. So I think the point of all this is we've all got to work together to make this a reality, and we all do our own little bit. I think, Nadia, do you want to say a few words? Yeah. Can you turn it on?
Yeah, okay, this is on. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for that question. I'm going to put my counselor hat on right now. So yes, 100%, it is a challenge. I think we do have the best intent, but as you know, especially like for these small municipalities up here, we just don't have the, I would say, like the depth and expertise within our own staff, and so we need to work with consultants, etc. And being a small municipality, things move slow in municipalities. And so usually it's more about catching up to trends, not necessarily always being ahead of trends. As you may know, the municipality of Grey Highlands, is just, talking about a master stormwater, plan. We don't have one in existence, right? So these things do take time. And I do appreciate that it is everybody working together. We have gaps. And, back in the 70s, the ministries may have actually came out and helped, with, lake management and all of that. But again, all of these government programs have been scaled back over time, right? And a lot of it has come, there has been some downloading to municipalities as well, through that. And so it's a real strain, and we just got to work with communities, with municipalities, all together.
Well said, Nadia. Well, why don't we give a big thanks to our 4 panelists. Thank you very much for spending a day with us. And we do have a gift for each of you. I think maybe Ed, you got yours, or somebody left one there. But we'll track you down with a gift for speaking with us. Thank you very much. I think we're having a short break now, and then we'll move on to the final session.